Hi friends, this is your ANR sir, welcoming you to ANR Academy, and today's lesson is for plus 1 CBSE students. The name of the lesson is The Portrait of a Lady, written by Kushun Singh. In this story, the narrator talks about a special feature that his grandmother has. So after reading the lesson, we come to know that special feature. So let us start reading the story. My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. She had been old and wrinkled for 20 years that I had known her. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband. But that was hard to believe. You see, in the first lines, the narrator described his grandmother. She is very old and her face has a number of wrinkles, and there was no change in his grandmother's face for last 20 years. He had people saying that once his grandmother was very beautiful and had a husband also. But the narrator is not ready to accept that. What is the reason? The reason is the grandmother's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. You see, in cold regions, in the drawing room they have a fireplace, and above that they have a place to hang the photos. So there one old photograph of the narrator's grandfather was there, and the grandfather looked very, very old. And seeing that photograph, the narrator is not ready to accept that old man was his grandmother's husband. What is the reason? He wore a big turban. You see, turban, talapaga. It is a headwear. Turban means what? A headwear. So he had a turban and loose-fitting clothes. You see, in those days, it was a fashion to wear very loose clothes. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest. That means he had a very big beard and long white colored beard covering most part of his chest. And all these things say that he looked at least 100 years old. He did not look the sort of person who would have a wife and children. That means his facial expressions, the age tells that this man might not have a wife and a number of children. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. That means, you see, he is very, very old. So he should have a number of grandchildren, but not children. As for my grandmother being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. That means the narrator is not ready to accept that she had a husband who lived at least 100 years old. So that thought completely making him unrest. She often told us the games she used to play as a child. You see, elderly people, they have a habit of telling about their youth to their grandchildren. So while saying such things, the narrator's grandmother usually talks about the games that she played when she was a child. That seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. The narrator is not ready to accept that his grandmother would play such games what younger children usually play. Clear? Because now grandmother looks very gentle. Understood? That is the reason the narrator is not ready to accept such things. All those things looked as if she was telling some fables. Fables means what? Some short stories in which animals are engaged. And those stories would tell some moral values. Okay, so now let us go to the next paragraph. She had always been short and fat and slightly bent. Who? The narrator's grandmother. Short. She is not at all tall, and she is a little bit fat and slightly bent. You see, in order to have a balance, the elderly people, they bend. So, narrator's grandmother is short, fat and slightly bent while walking. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere. That means her face has a number of wrinkles. No? We were certain she had always been as we had known her. So, the narrator is not at all ready to accept that once his grandmother was young. What is the reason? The reason is he has been seeing his grandmother's old face, a face full of wrinkles. So this thing not making him to accept the truth. What is the truth? The truth is, once his grandmother was young. So terribly old that she could not have grown older and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. You see, the narrator accepts. The narrator accepts the fact. What is the fact? His grandmother doesn't look pretty. Grandmother doesn't look pretty, but always she looked beautiful. Always she looked beautiful. You see, beautiful means by heart you should be beautiful. You should have some special qualities by which people like you. So here, grandmother, though she doesn't look pretty, she has some qualities which made her to be liked by a number of people. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. She hobbled. See, hobbled. Hobbled means what? Walking with some difficulty. Walking with some difficulty. You see, elderly people, while walking, they are not steady. They are not steady. They shake a little bit. So, she hobbled about the house in spotless white. That means she wore a saree. The color of the saree is white, completely white, without any spot, with one hand resting her waist. You see, in order to have a balance, the elderly people keep their left hand on their waist. Clear? And they bend in order to have a balance. And the other telling the beads. You see, you can see the elderly people have a garland having some beads, and they will be telling Ram, 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 Ram by counting the beads. So the elderly woman, narrator's grandmother, always holding such a garland in her right hand and telling the name of the God and counting. Telling the beads of her rosary. Her silver locks were scattered untidily on her face, pale, puckered face. You see, her silver locks. You see, when you become old, your hair would become white in color or like silver, like my hair. Like my hair. So grandmother's hair turned white. She has long hair, so some curlings are there. Clear? Scattered untidily. You see, if we apply oil and if you comb, then you have a tidy hair. But here, they covered her face. What covered her face? The complete hair covered her face. And here, pale. You see, elderly people, they lose brightness on their face. They lose brightness on their face. So, pale. Puckered. Puckered means what? Having lot of what? Wrinkles, like my face. I have become old. You see? I have a puckered face. And her lips constantly moved in an inaudible prayer. You see? Throughout the day, she would be telling the beads, taking the name of the God, in an inaudible, that means no one can listen that. Only you can see that. Yes. She was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains. You see, the narrator again says that his grandmother was beautiful. And he compared his grandmother's beauty to that of the winter landscape. So during the winter, the mountains would be covered with snow and it would give a very wonderful or beautiful look. An expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. You see, that is the thing. Beauty lies in contentment. Beauty lies in contentment. Because the narrator's grandmother completely contented. That is the reason for her peace, having peace. Most people, they are not at all content, wanting something or other. But the narrator's grandmother is completely having full contentment. So now, my grandmother and I were good friends. My parents left me. My grandmother and I were good friends. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. So once what happened, the narrator's father got transferred, or he went to city to live. There, before setting a family there, he kept his son, the narrator, with the narrator's grandmother, and once after getting settled, he wanted to shift the son there. So during that period, the narrator completely stayed with his grandmother. Clear? My grandmother and I were good friends, and during that period, they became a very good friends. She used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for school. You see, suppose you have some grandparents at your home. Daily, early in the morning, they wake you up. The reason is, it is a good habit to rise early in the morning. Clear? So the people who do not rise early in the morning, they lose some very interesting things in their life. Clear? She said her morning prayer in a monotonous sing-song while she bathed and dressed me in the hope that I would listen and get to know it by heart. You see, the narrator was a small child. That is the reason his grandmother used to make him everything ready for school, like having bath, having dressed, everything. During that time, grandmother used to sing some songs monotonously. That means without looking to any book, because she might have sung those songs a number of times. She might have sung those songs a number of times. That is the reason she got it by hearted. That is the reason she got it by hearted. And there is an intention for singing those songs, all those songs related to some mythological figures like Sri Krishna, Sri Ramachandra, like that. The intention is the child should listen and learn those songs. So in the whole that, I will listen and get to know it by heart. I listened because I loved her voice, but never bothered to learn it. So he liked those songs. Why? What is the reason? The reason is very simple. He liked his grandmother's voice, but he never bothered to learn it day by heart. Then she would fetch my wooden slate. You see now, you have notebooks, tabs, everything, and you carry them to your school. But in olden days, people used to carry a slate, and with the help of a chalk, they used to write on it. By help of a chalk, they used to write on a slate. So, the narrator's grandmother used to find the wooden slate, which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk. You see, people believed turmeric as a holy thing. So, she used to mark on the slate with the help of that turmeric paste, like Om or Sri or Sri Ram, like that. Clear? A tiny earthen ink pot and a red pen. You see, in those days, people used to write with a pen, not a fountain pen. They used to carry ink bottle. You have to dip the nib of that pen in that ink, which enable you to write on the paper. So, grandmother used to keep wooden slate duly washed. Next, earthen ink pot, a red pen. Tie them all in a bundle and hand it to me. She used to keep everything ready and she used to give before leaving the house. Clear? After a breakfast of a thick stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it, we went to school. Understood? You see, in the evening, they used to make some chapatis. They used to make 1 or 2 chapatis extra. And those chapatis, they used to take at breakfast. So on this chapati, what is spread? Butter is spread. On that, sugar is sprinkled. And it was given to the narrator at a breakfast. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs. See, in those days, people were very kind. They used to feed not only the people, but also the animals. Intentionally, grandmother used to prepare some extra chapatis keeping the street dogs in her mind. So she used to carry those extra chapatis. What? She prepared for feeding the street dogs. My grandmother always carried went to school with me because school was attached to the temple. You see, grandmother used to accompany the narrator to the school. The school is a temple. So the narrator would be reading, and at the same time grandmother would pray God. That is the reason grandmother always accompanied the narrator to the temple. The priest taught us the alphabet and the morning prayer, while the children sat in the rows on either side of the veranda singing the alphabet or the prayer in a chorus. My grandmother sat inside reading the scriptures. She used to carry some books, Ramayana, Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata, like that. So while her grandson was busy in reading, she used to read the scriptures. When we had both finished, that means the narrator's schooling over and the mother's reading the scriptures over, then we would walk back together. That means they used to return to their home. This time, the village dogs would meet us at the temple door. You see, the village dogs will be waiting for the grandmother to come from the temple, because they know very well that grandmother would feed them. They followed us to our home, growling and fighting with each other for the chapatis we threw them. So, while returning home, grandmother and the narrator used to feed the street dogs. So today, I stop teaching the lesson. Tomorrow again, I come up with the remaining part of the lesson. I think you liked my teaching. So if you like my teaching, do not forget to subscribe to my channel, English for All Examinations. Thank you for watching.